to welcome 3 panelists. I'd like to thank you all very much for taking time out of your busy schedules and dealing with the traffic to get over here. So, Martyn Darby is Director of Research at Affinergy. He received his PhD in biochemistry from the University of Birmingham and was a Senior Research Fellow at NIEHS. Trotta is a consultant with Thornbridge Bioscience and was previously Associate Director of Market Development at Advanced Liquid Logic. He received his PhD in neurobiology from Vanderbilt and was a postdoc here at Duke. Neurobiology, okay. And Daina Zeng is a scientist at Agile Sciences. She received her PhD in biochemistry from Duke. So to begin the discussion, I'll ask panelists to give a brief description of their background, and then we will go into the questions. A lot of you submitted your questions online. Thank you. So we'll start with those and then with the questions from the audience. So, Daina, would you like to start?
Sure. So I was a graduate student at Duke. My research project was working, I did research on endotoxins, so otherwise known as lipid A, and I was working on developing inhibitors that would disrupt the second step of the pathway, LPXC. And it was a collaborative project. So we basically synthesized the compounds in collaboration with Airtune and the Department of Chemistry. We would study how the inhibitor bound with the target protein LPXC and design modified inhibitors that were better. And I did the kinetic assay as well as some of the molecular biology validations of making different constructs, looking at the mechanism of action and seeing how these inhibitors actually worked when we throw them against the bacterial species. And then that was kind of my side project. My main project was creating resistant mutants, so actually created resistant mutants that were about 200-fold resistant. Which would be clinically relevant because if that level of resistance came up, these inhibitors would not work. And then looking at why these mutants were resistant. So I then transitioned into my current position for a small company on Centennial campus at State. And my current company is looking at inhibitors that disrupt bacterial signaling and cause the bacteria to not be able to turn on bacterial defense mechanisms such as the biofilms, the efflux pumps. And so I like to say that my line of research in my work here at Duke was looking at inhibitors that could be used against multi-drug resistant bacteria, and that is along the same lines as the work that I'm doing currently in my current company, and that allowed me to make the transition directly over to a position in industry.
Great, so my name's Nick. I put my email on the board because I don't currently have business cards that have any accurate information on it. So Thornbridge right now is me as an independent sort of consultant contractor. I'm currently writing grants for small to startup phase companies in the 0 to 5 employee kind of phase. So lots of PIs around here and in State and in some other places who have a cool idea that they want to try to move forward into a company. My background, I'm a neurophysiologist by training, usually in genetic model systems. I've worked in flies in grad school and at Vanderbilt and in mice here at Duke for about a year with a guy named Guoping Feng, who is now at MIT. I don't think he left to avoid me, but it's possible. So yeah, after a very brief postdoc, I sort of reached the crossroads that I think maybe a lot of you are hitting, trying to figure out, do I want to stay in academia for the rest of my life and hope I can beat the average age of an R01 funding by 12 years, or do I want to pull the cord and try to find something else? And I launched whatever it is, hundreds of thousands of resumes to all sorts of different positions, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with that process, and was fortunate enough to find a company locally called Affinergy that was very heavily invested in the small business grant program in the NIH. And so I joined them as a grant writer. So how'd that happen? So one of my lab mates, her husband was the director of preclinical studies at Affinergy, knew me. It always feels a little more comfortable to hire a known quantity, somebody you know, as opposed to a random piece of paper that's a list of qualifications. So I'd like to think I got the job on merit, but I think I was a familiar face. So, and then that led to a lot of other grant writing. Now I'm into more marketing, business development kind of things with my previous company, Advanced Logic. Laid off from them in August due to we were acquired about a year and a half ago by Illumina. So that was a wonderful success story. We had a lot of fun celebrating that, and so now I'm going to try to do it again in some other little small startup-y kind of places.
Martyn, Darby. So I think I have sort of some insight to career changes because I've worked for academia and the government and now in the private industry. So I'm a molecular biologist by training, I guess a biochemist before that because molecular biology wasn't very common back in the 80s. And so I switched to sort of DNA, protein, RNA interactions. I was a assistant professor in Philadelphia at Thomas Jefferson University for 10 years. Then I came down to work on a similar project at NIEHS. I think Molly, you were there, though I don't recall you from there. It's a big place. And then about 8 years ago, I moved over to Affinergy. I got a job there. I'd been looking probably for 4 or 5 years to find something in industry. And the first time I looked was actually the day after I was hired at NIEHS, which I thought was going to be a stepping stone to a biotech company. Was September 10th, 2001, and so the next day everything changed, and it took me a little while for the industry to recover from 9/11. And however, I've been at Affinergy for 8 years now. Did overlap with Nick, because our most successful years probably were with Nick. I'm still there. I was originally, so by the time I came in there, I was relatively aged. I was old now, but there is some resistance to that. I mean, I do the hiring now, and we can go into what we look for and how some things don't matter. So I was hired originally as a senior scientist, and I worked back at the bench again, which suited me fine. It's what I like doing. But since then, I've taken on more managerial roles, and now I direct all of the biology research that we do. I've also served on an NIH study section, the BEST program, which is designed to look at new and different ways to educate graduate and postgraduate students. It's an interesting program, and so it addresses the issue of whether or not we're giving postdocs and graduate students the right kind of training for the world that's really out there. We can discuss that.
Would you like to expand a little bit on what you are looking for and what things don't matter as a hiring manager? I think in terms of one of the questions on my list here is whether or not what the market is like for jobs. And so we're a small biotech company, really small. We're 25 people, and probably 12 to 16 are scientists at the bench, and most of them are actually PhDs. So what we're looking for is the market is 2 people have left, and that's the first time, actually 3 people have left in the last 6 months. And that just hadn't happened in the previous 5 or 6 years. They left to go to, better or different jobs. And these people were good people, and they were a loss. So it's an impact to a small company. When I lose 2 people from a biology group of 6, and they're both PhDs, and it has an impact. So we had to hire 2 people fairly quickly. Actually turned out to be not as easy as it has been in the past. First time people actually turned us down, which we made offers to. I mean, it kind of sounds a little boastful. I don't mean it that way. It's just people have choices. So I think actually the market's probably pretty good, at least in small biotech. So what we're looking for really, I think, is skill sets. That probably matters more than anything else. And you have to wait. I say I came in sort of at a later stage in my career. Of course, they needed to, didn't have to, but they did pay me more than they would for someone who'd just come out of their PhD or postdoc. So you have to sort of balance the costs that you're going to
curve against the benefit. And one thing that's very different between academia and the biotech is that when you come into a postdoc or your graduate career, your PI is fairly confident that you're going to be there for 3 or 5 years, whatever it might be. We don't have that luxury. And so it's really not in our interest in some ways, although I love to mentor people and we like to train people. If they're going to leave as soon as they're fully trained after a year, it's an impact. So getting people who already have the skill set so we don't have to invest too much time in them is probably the #1 priority. We have lots and lots of wonderful resumes from really smart people, really good people, done greater things than I've done, but they just don't fit, and probably they could do everything that we do, but it would just take too long to train them.
Daina, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like the job market's improving or about the same?
I mean, having just been laid off in August, I have been acutely aware of the job market for a while. I mean, the bench science roles appear to be there appear to be a pretty decent amount of those. I think obviously, as I'm sure everyone's aware, the snag there in big-ish biotech is that hiring PhDs into a scientist 1 role is not really of interest, right? They're looking more for somebody with a master's with 5 years experience or something like that, and somebody who can follow SOPs and even write SOPs and do industry-ish things. People that are familiar with quality systems and know how to sort of operate under those auspices and within those frameworks. So, in a place like Affinergy and some of the smaller places, it is nice to have a PhD in a sort of senior scientist role because you can work a little more autonomously. You don't need to be managed quite as much. There isn't a ton of management infrastructure at a place like Affinergy. I mean, Martyn's running whatever, half a dozen projects. And so having some people who can go off on their own is very helpful. But I don't know, right now is a bad time of year generally. Usually January, February is when people will have their budget set and they actually know who they can hire or they can't hire. So right now is I think is tough just in a cyclical nature. I mean, the economy is kind of back. Right, I mean, we're in much better shape than we were 2 years ago, and people are starting to make investments in their R&D again. So, but I think right now, probably people are making strategic decisions about what 2015 is going to look like and who they're going to bring in then. But bringing people on immediately right now is probably going to be soft.
Yeah, so I actually took a different approach to when I was looking for jobs. So before I submitted a single resume, a year before I was set to graduate, I started working on my resume and I started networking. And so for pretty much up to a year, I talked to everyone I could and got their advice on how to find a job, essentially, on how to network, what organizations I could join, and just to learn more about companies. Particularly, and I started with companies that were in the area in RTP since I was there, and it was seemed to be less complicated in terms of the geography. So I talked to everyone. I got their advice on how to write a resume because essentially it's a piece of paper and you really only have one shot. And so through my networking and going on to the North Carolina Biotechnology Center website, which also is a great resource. So on the website, they have a list of pretty much all the companies. And some of these companies don't have their own websites because when you're a small company, you need to have time and you need to hire someone to make your website if the founder doesn't do it. And so just doing a Google search, you wouldn't necessarily pull up these companies via Google. And so that's where I think networking really comes in. So I picked about 5 companies or so that worked on antibiotics because that's something that big pharma and a lot of the companies in biotech don't work on due to several reasons. So there were 5 companies in the area. I sent actually a letter, a cold letter, to these companies, and I actually got a response back from 3 of them. I got an interview offer for 3 companies of the 5. For the other 2 companies, I met up with them actually after I got my job, and they said that they actually didn't have any funding, but they actually received the letter. So my approach was a bit different. I think one of the best advice that I was given is that when you look for a job, your best job will be a job in which you've identified your niche. So all of us, we have extensive research background, and so I think it's important to try to identify, if going for the small companies, it's important to identify companies that are doing research that your research experience would be relevant. So you would have that set of expertise. In terms of training or lack thereof, my current company, they had sent me their current grants and publications a month before I started the job. The first day, my supervisor actually had needed to leave for an unexpected funeral. I got 2 hours of training. She showed me where the materials were, where the strains were, and that's all I got. And so that was the Monday, and then Wednesday was my first data meeting. So it's a very, and I presented data. And it's a very dynamic environment, and you just have to be able to come into a new environment and just really adapt and just hit the ground running.
And so what is a typical day like for you? Do you do mostly research? Nick, you started out writing grants. Martyn, you have done all kinds of different things. So what would be a typical day for a new hire, and then as they go up the ladder?
Well, so for a typical day for a new hire, we're a small company. We do not work for current projects under any kind of design control. We have casual SOPs. We don't spend weeks training someone how to pipette, etc. Certainly people that have left Affinergy tell me the tales of how it's 4 weeks, I'd say Syngenta, Novartis, until they actually are allowed to pipette anything. So we're very different. It's a little bit, right now it suits me very nicely because it is sort of like a research lab. We do a lot of discovery work. So it's really probably the same way for us, it's the same as you probably started your postdoc, you've got some papers to read, you've got the grants, we don't send out any grants or any confidential information until someone has actually signed on the dotted line. And I also wish people would take a little bit of a break before they join us instead of finishing one job on Friday afternoon and starting us on Monday. But anyhow, someone started on Monday, I guess, and she's spent a couple of days looking over our papers and grants, and someone else in the lab has been showing her where everything is, and we picked some small part of a project that would be familiar to her, and so, she can move into things fairly comfortably, but then we'll start increasing the pressure, and, she'll be presenting probably next Friday, whatever she's done this week. It's, I think we're a little bit different to most, larger companies. We are talking here about small biotech. We do have a lot of meetings. My day, on the other hand, I used to work in the lab. Less and less. I think the last time I really did a meaningful experiment was probably February, something like that. I start things and never manage to finish them. So, when I joined Affinergy, I used to laugh at the person that had the job before me. I'd just smile when he'd come into the lab. You don't think he's never going to finish that. Here I am, the same person now. I don't have the time to finish, even small projects.
I mean, I guess, I think when you're new, especially at a little place, one of the big transition points, I think, especially from a postdoc and from an academic perspective generally, is that everything you do as a grad student or as a postdoc, you're supposed to do independently and figure it out yourself, right? No matter what it is, no matter how new it is, no matter how foreign, you need to figure it out because that's part of your training. In a small place like Affinergy, there's no time for that, right, of trying to figure it out, right? It's much better to go get somebody on the phone who does know, who can just tell you how to do it. And just skip that step, right? So part of getting acclimated to a new place is figuring out what they do well, and who can show you how to do it right away, as opposed to you digging 30 years of literature and trying to figure out exactly how Tom Maniata's figured that out or whatever, right? That's not relevant anymore, right? Just go. I don't know, you know, the idea of attribution and that kind of stuff is just totally different, you know, in an industry setting where, you know, having attribution and having your name on papers and things like that, that's your currency now as an academic, and totally get that. You're going to trade that currency for money when you move to industry, right? And so,
not entirely. I mean, I think what you're saying is true, in that, you know, we work as a
Martyn has
team.
not fully made this transition.
No, and I think it's part of my management style, is that we still need a certain amount of recognition of who's done what. And you can't, you know, attribute, try to give, we do, as Nick alluded to, we are probably one of the top earners of SBIR grants, Small Business Innovation grants from NIH in the country, which is good and it's also bad. So we have a lot of projects running concurrently, and so I still like to give someone responsibility for a project. They're able to draw on everyone else as needed. And you know, that's what Nick's saying, is that you definitely don't sort it all out yourself, and that's what's so wonderful about it. I think working as a postdoc, you know, when I was doing it, and you know, when everyone was looking for those faculty jobs, you know, in those years, there's sort of definitely a level of competition even within the same lab. You know, who's got the best papers, who's doing the best experiments, etc., etc. It's none of that at Affinergy. It really is an excellent sort of team atmosphere, and everyone is willing to help everyone else. And you know, but I do like to give attribution to certain people, and you know, it's not only money, and it's also patents. You know, that's something else, you know, you'll be putting on your resume, and that's important. We also, I guess my senior management has a little bit of a resistance to publication, but I'm hoping to change that. We have lots of lots of interesting discoveries that aren't going to make a product, but certainly will make interesting, you know, academic papers. So, hijack your.
The one area where attribution matters in the industry, I would say, where it matters most, I would say, is in intellectual property. Obviously, getting your name on patents is a huge transition. So if you can start, you know, and you're going to have this valley of death when you go from academia to industry, where you're going to have this lull in your publication record. That's almost inevitable, right? Mine was dry up entirely.
Dry up,
So,
not well.
you know, I had this, you know, couple of years where I was no longer a relevant scientist. Well, I was even less relevant scientist than I was previously, and didn't necessarily have business chops to do what I wanted to do, you know, going forward. So you have this sort of I don't know, not valley of death, maybe too dramatic, but you know what I mean. There's this sort of lull in your productivity, and that's, you know, to be expected. And surviving that is important.
But then you did transition into business development, right?
Yeah, once again, so yeah, but that took, you know, whatever it is now, 6 steps. Well, and you know what I mean? Wherever I am now in that transition. So that's been 8 years, whatever it is, right? So there's a period there where it's you know, you're kind of giving up a skill set to go build another one, and it just is going to take time to develop that.
And can you talk about that a little bit? Like, how did you go from writing the grants to helping sell the company?
Yeah, so this is what's great about small places, right? And so my ego will not tolerate being in a huge organization where I'm in charge of, you know, tracking these 5 standard operating procedures, right? I need to feel my impact. I need to do lots of different things. And so in a small place, when there's, you know, 12 of you, you know, battlefield promotions are just part of that. So you might be at the bench working with a certain project, but you might find yourself roped into regulatory and roped into putting together a pitch presentation for a corporate partner who's coming in, or you know what I mean. Daina's nodding. She probably has slides that are due here in a couple hours. So you know, stuff like that. You just get roped into so many more areas of the company. And if that's of interest, then great. If you're somebody who likes to be tunnel focused on one thing, then a bigger company might be better, right? Because they're going to put you on this project, and that's going to be your bag. But if you're in a small place, it's, you know, you're going to be touching lots of different areas. So the grants are an interesting, you know, sort of crystallization point for a lot of different things. Because, you know, the small business grants, you need to be doing, you know, the science, the research, the marketing, you know, the intellectual property. There's all of that needs to be represented in these small business grants, and so you end up touching a lot of different things. We guess there's a very small percentage of you that grant writing is your favorite part of your current job. It is a nice area to get into with a small place, especially because small places usually don't have a ton of money, and so the funding is paramount. And bringing in just a few $100,000 can be a really big deal for a 3-person company. So.
Thank you. So if these postdocs and graduate students were applying today, what would increase their odds of getting an interview with you? So having the right skill set, is it networking? Are there organizations they can join? Should they go to WorkLife and take a course on GMP?
If you can bring your own funding, that would be number 1. But that's probably not. Doesn't work every time.
Well, I'm trying to think what, I mean, obviously, I talked about the skills. Obviously, we'll receive a resume, we'll look through and see what kinds of, who you worked for, what papers you published, that you have published first author papers. Because I'm looking for researchers, I'm looking for people who are creative. But if, let's say you just simply do not have the skills, it's still possible with a good cover letter and some thought that's gone into what Affinergy does. If you can find out, you could find out about Affinergy. Unfortunately, not too much from our website because it was purposefully made extremely bland. I need to go into that, but since we receive funding from NIH, you can search for us there. You'll see what a lot of our projects are from that. And if you thought that you had some skills that you could work into that would get my attention for sure. Better than a bland letter that says, I'm really interested in your company, and sort of just absolutely generic stuff. I mean, that stuff just, don't really take much notice of that. But if even you were talking about cold letters, cold calling. It's actually quite impressive.
Absolutely.
If somebody turns up at the door and says, "Here's my resume. I think I could do X, Y, and Z for you. Do you have 5 minutes to talk?" That's really impressive, actually. That someone has the nerve. We actually had an amazing young man came by. He's a medical student now, but he was like a 2nd or 3rd year biomedical engineering student. He just turned up at the door with his resume. He was amazing in the lab. He's a really smart kid. And, so we took him on as a summer intern. Obviously, it's a little bit different for a job, but for the right person, there's for a small company, there is sometimes a possibility that we'll take on someone when we hadn't really intended it. So I wouldn't rule out that sort of cold call or just knocking on the door.
I think the most important thing is to network. I will add that through networking, these companies were suggested to me. So I did send them a cold letter, but they were recommended. That course of action was recommended from a board member. So it was, here's a cold letter, and then an interview process. Oh, by the way, your board member recommended me. And then there were, and it's actually interesting because in the local community, it's actually a relatively small network, and it took me about, I would say, 6 months before I circled back, before I said, oh, we already met. And I equate networking to literature searching. When you go on PubMed and when you read papers on what's been done, what's out there, it's not going to give you the actual data that you need to present this Friday for your data meeting. And in the same way that networking may not directly lead you to your next job, however, what it does give you is a lay of the land, what has been done, what is going on, particularly since companies such as my own company and other small companies don't have the most current information on the website. And so that it really gives you I would say one of the few opportunities to really learn what is going on through networking. And people have said, well, have you looked into this company? I know that they just received funding. It's not on the website yet, or they don't have a website. However, I know that they're currently hiring. They just received funding, and they're working on da-da-da-da. I actually have a friend that works there. Would you be interested, and I can make an introduction for you. And that was how I identified, that led me to identification of the companies that I applied to. Just a couple things to back up. I know that, so when I was a student and I was looking at applying jobs, there were a couple of key notes key phrases, SOP, standard operating, not very flexible in that requirement. So taking a course on GMP and GLP practices, I think would be helpful, particularly if you are applying for those positions. There are programs at NC State actually that have specific biomanufacturing courses in which they do actually work with reactors. And so there are people, just to get, give you a sense of who your competitors might be, there will be people that do come out of their academic career with that on their resume. So anything that if you're interested in those positions, they're more technical positions, taking a course would be immensely helpful. In terms of what a typical day is for me, it's a series of problems. So it's problem solving. So I work on, typically on any, within any quarter, I probably work on 3 to 5 projects. And so at the start of the quarter, I'm kind of giving, well, these are our projects, these are the questions that we want to answer, and go from there. And so I design experiments, and I write grants, design experiments, do experiments. It's about 50-50, about 50% bench work, 50% office work, writing grants, assembling data packages, putting together presentations, presenting, talking to our collaborators, talking to other organizations that do some of the animal work for us. And then, in terms of designing experiments, there is a limit on time and there is a limit on resources. And so in academia, in grad school, I would always, want to come up with something novel, create a novel construct and really, figure out how something works. Whereas in a small company, you want to do the assay that's the most simple, because you need to have a very straightforward experiment. And you need to have results that would mean something to someone that's in business development. So you don't have, 5 minutes to explain, well, in this experiment we're looking at when they just want to know, does your technology work? Does it work against these species? Are these species, are they universally accepted, or are they, are these species, what's typically used in the industry? Do you have key opinion leaders that support you? And so the bench work is a little bit different. And so there's a lot of, I find myself having to think a lot more about experiments instead of just, I think there is something in a small business, you certainly have to go and do and try the experiments. You can, have analysis paralysis. But I think that, time is very valuable, money is valuable, and so, it's definitely a priority on trying to design the simplest experiments to get the most results out of it and maximizing efficiency. In terms of the non-bench work part, that's divided into grant writing, into putting slides, into presenting. I actually just had a deadline last week in which we had our annual board meeting. It's a series of problems. And it's not, so actually my training was in biochemistry, now I'm working on microbiology, and through my current job, I've actually done it's gotten me into analytical chemistry, it's gotten me into actually formulations. One of my current projects is developing an aerosol formulation, which we have a CRO lined up for that's going to charge us $25,000, and just kind of coordinating with them and doing some in-house formulations first. I've spent an afternoon removing a virus from my supervisor's computer. I've also done some IT support and figuring out why our email systems went down. Also ordering some lab maintenance, whatever needs to be done in essence. And I think that one of the key qualities in working for a small company is to be able to solve problems and to think outside the box and to just get it done. I don't know how to do it now. Give me a couple hours. I will wiki it, I'll Google it, and I'll figure it out. And it's just really the attitude to just be thrown into something that's the unknown. I think another really important skill is to be able to present the data. So I work with different, I work with junior scientists all the way up to board members. And so I can explain the same project, or I'll be working on the same project and the same experiments, but the way in which I explain it will be completely different, particularly in the layouts, whether I'm talking to a junior scientist who will be actually doing the experiment versus a board member who just wants the bottom line. Does our stuff work? And if it does, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to develop it? And so it's communication is really key, and just kind of thinking in your head who your target audience is and what would be the best way to present it. And it's very different. It's how I write about a project versus in a technical report versus for SBI or STTR grant, in which you really need to sell your technology. So I think the emphasis on problem solving and on communication and networking to find a job, just to see what the lay of the land looks like.
Great answer, thank you. Do we have questions at this point? Yes.
I'm curious, what's the work-life balance or work hours like compared to being a postdoc? How often do you go late into the evening, or the weekends, and how much does it take on your life?
So
If you work for Martyn,
it just depends on what the workload is and how tight the deadline is. Certainly, a lot of people work at weekends, just not all day, but to keep things going. But if we have a particular deadline that we have to meet, well then yes, you work late. But no, I don't think, no one's working 16 hours every day. But if you have to, then you have to. So I'd say generally, we have people come in as early as 7:30, and leave a little after 6, but it's not the same people. So it's pretty flexible. I don't think it's not as bad as graduate school, or when you're trying to get your stuff together for a job presentation or whatever as a postdoc, and you go for an interview. It's the same kind of deal. You work as much as necessary, but it is very changeable. That's interesting comments. You do have to be prepared to wear a lot of different hats. Fortunately, we do have sort of IT people and so on, but there have been times when, I know a colleague of mine literally spent half a day getting rid of a virus on his boss's computer, that kind of thing. But I don't think it's an excessive workload, no.
I do think it's cyclical. It's especially in a small company that's grant funded. It's going to be 3 times a year. It's going to get nuts, right around April 5th, August 5th, and December 5th. Even those days, my first week in industry outside of my postdoc, I remember walking my dog at around 7 o'clock in the evening, thinking, "This is a thin slice of heaven, right? I haven't done this in a year, right?" So, I do think it's part of. Even small companies, it's a little bit part of it. It should always be part of the culture to promote a work-life balance. Because if you're, stressed and frayed at the edges, you're no good to me. At work. So I think there's a little more respect for that even in startups. But again, if it's a Fortune 500 company comes knocking at the door and they're coming Friday, that's going to be all hands on deck time. And hopefully, being part of a small company, hopefully you feel that sense of, that it's not necessarily a job, it's more of a cause that you're committed to, right? And hopefully that comes around, and hopefully there are periods where, you can strike more of a balance between work and life, and hopefully that's part of your leadership's culture. So.
I would say, it's, we have, my deadlines are on a quarterly basis, about 4 times a year. And it does fluctuate, as with research. There's just some days where you just have to stay for 20 hours, and other days where you can be out in 6 hours. I think that one of the things that it's a different mindset. So for my current company, when I first started, I was probably working about 60 to 80, and now I'm working about 40 to 50 actually. And I've actually gotten more productive. I think that certainly when you go to a new place, there's a learning period in which you kind of get a feel of what the new environment is and what the job is. And then after a while, you know, when you know more, you pick up speed, you become more efficient. And so I think that in industry, certainly there is an emphasis on work-life balance. And for example, my supervisor actually has a child, and she just had a son, and so she will take off time to, you know, to pick up her son from daycare, and she has a set schedule. So I think that compared to academia, that there is, you don't need to feel guilty about not coming in on the weekends, or, you know, feel pressure to not do that, but of course there are major deadlines, and, you know, when those deadlines come, all hands on deck.
Other questions? Yes, Matt?
So you each mentioned, I guess, a few ways that you can kind of look at the mission, the overall mission of the company, and some of the funding that might underlie it, like small business grants, the government grants, even networking. Are there any other ways that maybe you can see about the health of a company, or, you know, how they're functioning currently in the moment?
You mean like if they're going to still be in business? And
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
It's tough. I mean, I would definitely look at IP prior to an interview. We look at the patents, if they have things filed, to see if you can find those things. They'll have chunks of that will be published and out there. Patents are really expensive. If they have a dozen patents that are all active that they're funding, then they have, that's a lot of money, right, to pump into that. So if they're supporting all of that, then they probably have, you know, a decent operating budget for the coming future. I mean, you don't spend money on a patent estate unless you're serious about it, right? So ask the tech transfer office, right? They have a bajillion patent applications up there that they're not pursuing because they don't see value. So I think that's an important thing. You know, it's hard with a small company because, you know, they're not required to have any information, you know, that's publicly available. You never know. I mean, there are little places out there that are publicly traded. I mean, Transenterix is in the park. They're now public. They're not a massive operation, but you can get a lot of information from the SEC. So 10K reports and things like that. You know, they're required to file those things every quarter. Small companies are not under those rules unless they're publicly traded for whatever reason. So, and looking up the leadership, knowing who they are, right? If you see that the CEO has 2 or 3 successful exits, they've sold this company for $400 million, this one for $250, and this one for $1 billion. That CEO's probably doing okay. And if they really got into emergency mode, he could probably start writing checks. You know what I mean? Stuff like that is probably good to check out. Seeing who the board is, you know what I mean? Are they the real deal, or are they, you know, the academic PI that started the company and his 2, you know, fishing buddies? You know what I mean? That's not a good sign.
That's probably true. I mean, I think for small companies, you know, if you bring in any money with external, you know, collaborators or venture capital, they love to publish that. So they will tell you about it in some kind of news release. You want to see that the company's growing. It's not still just, it sort of said there, you know, the PI of you know, a lab and his postdoc, that they actually have separated from academia perhaps, and really do have a company, and it's not just a name and something to put on a, you know, an academic's resume that they started a company somewhere. They come and go. So I think, yeah, sort of longevity is one thing, but yeah, there isn't a lot of information to be gained other than what is self-published on websites or the small business grant. We've gone through various cycles with various collaborators who put money into the company. We're actually fortunate that we were never funded entirely by venture capital because we wouldn't exist anymore. we've always been able to bounce back with some new idea through the SBIR system, and in a sense, over the years, that's given NIH a confidence in Affinergy and what we can do. Everything's based around finding peptides to do things. I guess if you looked at Affinergy, what would give you confidence? Longevity, I guess, is that, we've been around for probably 10 years total, and has grown from 2, 3 people to 25.
I guess another way to phrase that is like, is there job stability in this field as a whole? So if you were one of the architects of the deal to sell your company.
So, for the camera, I don't know if that's necessarily accurate, but thank you very much. That's nice of you to say. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of churn. I think that's for sure true. Almost everybody I meet who's over the age of, let's say, 40 in this industry locally has worked for Glaxo at some point, and been laid off by Glaxo at some point. So there's plenty of churn throughout the industry, especially among the big companies. I think there's a lot of give and take there, getting hired on, even as contract work and things like that. That's an area I wouldn't disregard totally. I think it's hard to sort of take this big leap for a 6-month contract job, unless you are really committed to it. If you have children or mortgage or whatever, that can be a little scary, but I wouldn't necessarily disregard the idea of taking a contract for a few months and just showing your chops to a company. North Carolina is not in great shape as far as our biotech community. It's not in the best shape it's been. We're still generating a ton of federal funding through small business grants and research dollars through the universities. We're not drawing the same sort of venture capital and angel investment we used to. That's way down. But the governor's office is aware of that and is trying to promote a few programs to try to help make that work and bring some of those things back. We'll just reserve our thoughts about the governor for another discussion. But he has a task force of people that are all of the right people that are working on that issue. So if one of the big places leaves the triangle, leaves the park, we're probably in really bad shape, but I don't think that's going to happen for a while. So I think it's still a sustainable area, certainly in the small startup kind of area. There are hundreds of cool technologies in this area that are being pioneered by 2 or 3 guys in a garage, right? And those things are going to keep percolating and bubbling, and some companies are going to be built. Some real big companies are going to be built out of some of those things. So it's a downtime for startups for sure in this area, but no way to go but up.
It's always risk joining a startup company. That's part of the thrill, isn't it? In a way, you're hoping that you're going to be the next Apple or Microsoft or whatever, and that your stock options will actually mean something. You kind of do live with a certain amount of fear. Unlike when you start your postdoc, you probably got 3 years unless you do something really bad. But if I would tell my boss where to go one day, I can be let go that day. We've seen people walk out the door with their boxes, on the day. It was a shock to me the first time, I experienced something like that. So it's a little bit nerve-wracking, but we're still in existence, and it's sort of scary and motivating at the same time. And I think the people who do stick with it are really, hard workers and determined to make something happen. We all go in there, no matter what the failure, to sort of start over again and just keep working on these projects because we believe that something is going to turn into a product eventually. I don't think you could work in a small biotech if you didn't believe that. People who leave generally say they do it because they're worried about the stability of the company. So that's a personal decision. And that's sort of one thing that's very different between sort of your academic careers and a biotech career. But of course, as I'm sure you're all aware, you can't remain a postdoc forever. Unfortunately, the academic system as it is loves to funnel people into this industry, which supports the PIs. I'm not sure as it really looks after the people involved who are doing work.
I mean, I have no data to support this, but my guess would be 95 to 99% of small biotech companies, certainly in this area and maybe just nationally, are cash flow neutral or worse, right? Very, very few are selling product, very few companies, especially in this area, very few are hiring the guys in the polo shirts who go to the trade shows to sell stuff, right? There's very few of those. Most of the small places around here are writing grants, getting funding from commercial partners, angel money, venture, whatever it is. They are just supporting their R&D efforts. And with the promise one day that somebody will come along and license their technology or buy the company or want to distribute their products or whatever. And whatever revenue they're generating off of those things is going right back into their R&D operation for the next big thing, right? So, I don't know, there's sustainability in that, but then there's also whatever revenue a lot of these companies are creating, they're also spending, right? And so if the revenue goes down, they will spend less, right? And hire fewer. So it's still sustainable, just maybe at different levels. So, I don't know, just because a company doesn't have a product doesn't necessarily mean it's not sustainable.
Absolutely.
Exhibit A.
Thanks.
In my opinion, there's no such thing as job security. And talking with actually my friends some of my friends that work in HR. So in my parents' generation, actually every time I talk to them, in their generation, I think that they've worked for a big company and they stay there for 20 to 30 years, and they say, oh, why don't you work for a big company? You could, and stay there until retirement. And I've, told them, times have changed. I think the average time for a job nowadays is about 3 years. Every 3 years, people move. And it's because, they're really, even in academia, PIs lose grants, unfortunately, all the time. Obviously, working for a small business is risky, but even for a large companies are changing their business philosophies. They are now taking a shopping cart and buying smaller to mid-sized companies instead of investing in their own internal R&D. I've known people that were previously VPs at GSK, and GSK just chopped off the entire department and they were laid off. And of course, luckily they were able to find another job, actually a better position actually due to their network. And it doesn't take them, that long. But it happens. I've actually part of a professional organization called Women in Bio, in which the members have decades of experience, and they've all been directors or above. And so one of the events that we did, the question was, how many of you have been laid off or let go? Raise your hand. And it was about 90% of the room. They're really, and even when you do, get a job, the advice I've been given from many people is to, never keep on looking for opportunities and never say no. The best advice I've gotten, actually it was from a committee member when I told them I was going into industry, was save money. Because there is no such thing as a job security. And I think that for me, since I'm starting out my career, I'm trying to position myself so that I would go to a job and learn. Gain exposure to a new technology and pick up skills, such as grant writing, expanding some of the skills that I have, into other disciplines of science, and learning more business development, going into more of the, regulatory pathway. And another reason why it's so important to network and to join these organizations and maintain your network. One of my mentors actually gave me a really good piece of advice. And he said that at the end of it all, there are two things that they can't take away from you. One is your education, your degree, and your publications and patents, and the other is your network. Jobs will come and go, but as long as you foster those two, you should be fine, you will be fine. Another mentor actually said that, when you apply for your job, don't think about what your next job is. Think about where you want to be in 2 jobs down the road. So where do you want to be at your next job? And will this current job lead you to your next job, which will lead you to where you ultimately want to be? And I think that it's important to have, to really think about that, on how you want to position yourself and see what skill sets you can gain from each position. And to just really keep your eyes open and keep on networking, and join organizations where you can expand your network and get advice and mentorship. Because nowadays, the average, for what I've been told from my friends that work in recruiting and in human resources for some of the, in this area and for some of the larger companies, is that the average position is about, 3 years or so, 3 to 5 years. I have met some people that have worked for a large company for the past 20, 30 years, but they're quite rare. And even now the business philosophy is changing. So it's always good to keep your eyes open and understand that it is a dynamic environment. And even now in academia, I have friends, whose PIs have lost funding. I don't think that anything nowadays is guaranteed. It can be I suppose it can be at times a somewhat scary situation, but the flip side of it is to always, to never take anything for granted, and to always put yourself in an environment in which you can learn and expand your skills and to position yourself, and to keep your eyes open.
Thank you. And we're about out of time, so I'm going to ask the one question that is always submitted more than once, which is, can you talk about the pay for a beginner in this field?
To answer that, I want to Daina said about 2 jobs ahead. I think that's a wonderful point and really, really perfect. When you, in your first job, do not consider trying to maximize your earning potential now. Consider trying to maximize your earning potential in 2 jobs, whatever that is now, 6 years. You could use your 3 years per job, which I think is probably spot on. But I don't know. I don't actually know what the number would be. I guess it depends on.
It's going to depend on the company and what they can afford, and we usually structure it around obviously experience, whether or not, first of all, whether or not you have a master's or PhD. Postdoc would depend on whether or not it was really relevant sort of skill set and that you're bringing something that we need. But what counts for a lot as well is whether or not you have experience in another company. So certainly if, for anyone that's joined Affinergy that's already, accustomed to working in a commercial environment rather than academic, that will obviously we also have to match and improve on their current salaries. I guess people are making, I don't really want to commit to a number, but in our case it's under 100,000, so
Between 30 and 150.
between 30 and
What's that minimum just went up to 42? Is it
42.
Is it better than 42?
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. No, for a PhD, that would be very definitely. Yeah, probably in the 70s.
So the upside of, right, so the 2 things that I think you should evaluate if you're going to take a job is what are you going to learn? Are you going to learn something that moves you forward? And what, and can you be successful, right? So you want to be successful and you want to learn a lot and you want to prove to everybody how smart and brilliant and capable you are. The problem with taking something that's a little lower in salary is that that's your salary for your next job that you have to tell them that's what you're making. And so then they'll, just like Martyn said, they're going to take that and multiply it by 1.08 or whatever to try to give you an offer, right? And so that's sort of, it can handcuff you there. The alternative is to have some kind of bonus program built into your current job if you can do that, and then talk about that, and I don't know,
So negotiate.
or, I mean, round up is also a good thing when you're talking to that next job. So, I don't mean lie, but fabricate.
So salaries here are going to be 20% lower than in Boston or California because the cost of living here is significantly cheaper. And so for an equivalent, in some of the larger companies that have multiple branches, for an equivalent position here, they will pay about 80% salary. The American Chemistry Society has a link or a feature, if you remember, where you can enter the amount of experience you have and your information, and they'll tell you what the average is. I'm sure you all know that if you Google something, there are websites such as Glassdoor that will tell you kind of a range. For my company, and they did research into what other companies in the area pay, I would say for a PhD coming in with no previous experience in industry, it's probably ranges between about 60 to 80 minus any bonuses. And I mean, every package is different. You have to look at what's included, what the overall, do you have 401k, do you have health insurance?